Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and welcome to an AI special for Anfield Index. Arne Slot has 18 months left to go on his deal. There's a mixed reaction across the fan base to how things are going. Everything's got to be taken into account, though, hasn't it? Recruitment, style of play, and now, of course, there is the looming figure of Javi Alonzo running all the way through discussions. I'm joined as ever by the renowned and the respected David Lynch, and I'm not being funny on this one. I've set you a fair bit of homework to discuss and look for ready, haven't I? Ready to go.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a long one, but I think it's a complex topic and deserves a bit of time to really kind of think about it. So, yeah, looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, there is a lot to start with, and I suppose as we get straight into it, however we discuss or address certain areas, the one thing that just, or a couple of things, I suppose, that can't be ignored. The first thing is around the tragedy with Diogo Jota. There's no way of ever being able to quantify, fully analyze what effect that's had on Arne Slot and the team as well.
Yeah, 100%. I just think it's something you have to factor into it when you're talking about the whole thing, and it's why kind of you have to approach it with the right tone as well, because it's unquantifiable. I mean, it's not just because it's not just losing someone that you work with. It's losing someone who's a friend. A lot of the players were close to him, and it's a very different environment work wise to sort of so many highs and lows together. The emotional roller coaster you experience. It's not just like kind of clocking in normal circumstances, and it's a very, very different kind of emotional beast than that. And so to lose someone, the prime of their life, who was such a big character in the dressing room as well. And then, of course, to lose the footballer, which is just massive because he was a big player for Liverpool and a big player last season. It's very, very hard to kind of measure that. And so I think in all kind of assessments of the season that you're doing, that has to be factored in, even though it's very, very hard to say how much of an effect that would have. I think you've got to kind of be mindful of the way you talk about it at the very least, whilst also acknowledging that it has to have had some emotional and also kind of emotional impact, but also an impact on the footballing side of things, because Liverpool lost a great person, but also a very, very good footballer as well in very unusual circumstances. So it's definitely a factor that's worth considering, that's for sure.
Yeah, it can't simply be dismissed. Even now, this is going to something that's going to have long ructions for a lot of those players. And the second element I really wanted to bring to the table is I understand some of the arguments. I understand some of the criticisms of Arne Slot, no doubts about it, and we'll go into those. But whatever way we talk about this is a title-winning manager who's brought a real element of class to the club as well since he's been in charge. That should always be remembered, that respectful element, shouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think that kind of just to go back to the Jota situation as well, this is what frustrates me the most about some of the things that you read about Arne Slot online at the moment. While there is a debate, and we will get into that debate, and I think it's important to say that debate is fair to have on the basis that it's being had internally at Liverpool. So it will be remiss of us not to acknowledge that. But there's a way you can talk about him, I think, and the disrespect I see, I find that really, really hard to believe. I don't think Arne Slot will ever experience that inside Anfield, because that's just, it will never. I think everybody in the ground acknowledges the way he's handled himself around the Diogo Jota situation, just pure class. And I saw people saying months ago, could never imagine anybody else, any other manager in the hot seat. He's been the perfect guy to move on from Jurgen. And then some of those same people talking about him in such a disrespectful manner. He deserves so much more than that. And he's also, by the way, a fantastic head coach. He may not end up, the sum of this debate maybe that we suggest that we don't believe he should be the manager next season or whatever. And I think it's a totally fair debate to have, as I say, because that's going on internally at Liverpool. But he's a Liverpool manager who won the league. There are not very many out there of them. And Liverpool managers who won the Premier League, which has been going for 30 odd years, there are only two of them. So, I mean, he deserves unbelievable levels of respect, and not just for kind of what he did as a football manager, but for the way that he holds himself as well. So, the problem is it's so kind of, this debate is so entrenched and angry at times that you can't offer valid criticisms without being seen as fueling the fire, and you also can't, kind of support without being told that you're naive or whatever. So it's too entrenched. But I think through the whole thing, I think the way that Arne Slot should be spoken about is with unbelievable respect. I mean, how many managers, not just for Liverpool, won the Premier League full stop? He did a brilliant job last season, and he's also, he's won the Dutch league as well. So he's absolutely no idiot, that's for sure. Whether he's the right man for Liverpool going forward or not, that's not up for debate about the way he should be spoken about.
Yeah, it should be respectful across the board. And I mean, as we talk, and we'll go topic by topic and we'll explore everything, because it's right to sort of put the both sides of the argument.
Just to come in there quickly, because I think this is a really, really important place to start. Is that one of the comments there is there's no way Slot gets sacked, no chance. And I think we have to make this point at the start. There's every chance that something happens at the end of the season. Yeah. You cannot. I think it's crazy to suggest that is not even slightly on the table for Liverpool. I mean, it came back probably. It came quite close out. There was at least a discussion around when things got really, really bad. And then going to the end of the season, 100% what's going to happen, which is why, if there was no chance Slot would get sacked, they would have given him a new contract by now. That's just, if they think this, okay, we've had mitigating factors. We didn't give you the right squad. We've given you all these problems. They would just sign him up to a new contract now, because Arne Slot's not going to want to be in a situation where he's in his final 18 months of his deal and not getting a pay bump and all those things. So that show of faith would have happened by now. So clearly there's at least some form of internal debate going on around the manager. And that will take into account several aspects, underlying numbers, performance over a long period of time, and whether that is likely to get Liverpool to where they need to be, and of course all the mitigating factors that he's faced. So I think one thing I would say is attempts to shut down the debate, I don't think they're neither fair or an accurate representation of where things are internally at Liverpool. This is not just people trying to stir up nonsense and trying to cause trouble or anything like that. This is a genuine situation where all outcomes are being considered, and to just dismiss that, I don't think he's kind of in touch with the reality of the situation, to be honest.
It's a bit strange, because the same people that seem to be dismissing it are the ones who are quite happy to talk about Van Dijk, Salah, Konate over the last 18 months and how their contracts are running down. So absolutely everything's got to be considered here on the table. I suppose the first place to start, and this is always one to focus on, recruitment, because usually if you get right your recruitment, the rest follows a lot of the time. I suppose the biggest charge those who will criticise Arne Slot will level at him, David, is you look at the players that came in the summer and the money spent, like Florian Wirtz, a deal that could reach 116 million, 116, sorry, Isak, Ekitike, Kirkes, Frimpongs, like a lot of money spent, a lot of quality players will be the argument of the biggest critics there. And they'll also be saying that any other coach would be begging to have those types of players in their team or in their squad. Where do you stand on that argument?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is, maybe this is slightly damning of the manager, is that you would say, I don't think Liverpool have signed a bad player. I think Isak completely out of his hands. That injury situation has been a nightmare, and the way Liverpool went about it has caused problems, of course. But I think without doubt, and I think we are starting to see it in this part of the season now, is Liverpool have signed very, very good players. So, he's got a good squad, I think, at his disposal, and one that I think perhaps by this point of the season particularly should be playing a little bit more slickly and with a bit more understanding. That's an area I think has been disappointing, because I just don't think he's been given a bad group of players. Because I look back through, I used to defend Rafael Benitez to the hilt, for example, and he was a manager who he just was never given the tools really to put together an elite side, and when he did, that was then picked apart very quickly, and he was always up against it in that sense. So he felt like he was managing with one hand tied behind his back. Whereas I think Liverpool now, in terms of what they do in recruitment and the quality of the players they've got, I mean, it's the most lavish spending we've ever seen for a Liverpool manager, and albeit, of course, there is the flip side to that, and that Liverpool generated a lot of that cash. But I mean, the profiles and the quality that they brought in, and there's a lot of good players there. And as I say, the first couple of months of the season, you totally understand where, they're not playing to the best. The understandings are not there. But I think at this point, that's partially something that maybe slightly damns him a little bit.
Yeah, it doesn't. We've talked about this on pods as well, because when you think to different times, we talked about how Kirk has seemed glued at Van Dijk's hip and they weren't using him in the right style. And he's looked better over recent months as well. We've got to be honest as well and say, we've seen this season Florian Wirtz start in the 10, been on the left, been on the right for a few games, even in the double pivot as well. There's almost been an element of, has he known how to get the best out of these signings?
Yeah, I think he maybe would look back with a little bit of regret and maybe say that with Wirtz in particular, maybe the best way into the team for him would have been on the left wing initially, rather than just popping him in the 10 and saying, right, go and deal with the Premier League physicality and how crazy it is. That was kind of, that was maybe a misjudgment. But equally, I think he's right to think that he can and will play in the 10 eventually. So, to be fair, I think that's one where, he might have thought he'd have maybe done something slightly different at the start of things, but and maybe have some regrets about that. But I think his plan in general about Wirtz, I don't mind that at all, and that's why Liverpool go and get him the best possible 10 they can go and get him. That can work in this league. I know at the moment it doesn't look so much like it, but I think it will get there eventually, particularly when Wirtz is up to speed fully. So yeah, maybe some regrets about how he used him initially, and maybe that ended up causing some confusion because then he had to move him a few times to try and make it work. But I think we're going to see more of Wirtz in that 10 now.
Yeah, hope so. Hope we see this form continuing as well. I suppose with recruitment, you've got to bring this man into the table because sporting director Richard Hughes, and there's always this element of, I always think smoke and mirrors when you're analysing sporting directors and where they had. But you said there that you don't think Liverpool have signed a bad player. So someone will make the argument, well, that Richard Hughes has done his job well. Maybe it's Arne Slot not using him, but Arne Slot, we're told, has a say on involvement is maybe the right phrase in selecting these players. Where do you stand then on recruitment? Is it more credit to Richard Hughes, Arne Slot being criticised, or we've got to balance this?
I think there's a balance there in that, okay, I don't think Richard Hughes signed a bad player. I think he did really well, got some decent deals in there and the right deals. I think where the criticism maybe comes is that it's an awful lot to do in one summer. And that causes huge problems that Slot has had to deal with. And I really do feel for him around that, because churn is just a nightmare really for managers. It's really, really tough. And someone says in the comments there, Semenyo's hit the ground running for City, and that's absolutely happened. But Ekitike hit the ground running for Liverpool. But unfortunately, you were asking Ekitike to do that, Wirtz to do that, Kirkes to do that, Frimpong to do that. It's an awful lot of change. And the facts are that some people are going to do what Ekitike did. Some people are going to do what Semenyo did. And some people are going to do what Fabinho did. Or Andy Robertson, for example. It will take time. And so, Liverpool have previously avoided massive churn in summer windows. And I think this is the reason why. So, you maybe ask the question of why has it happened like this time? Why didn't he just do a little bit more last summer to stop needing to do as much this summer? And that has made it really difficult for Arne Slot. So I really, really sympathise for him around that, really. And the other criticism as well, but you can maybe just level at the sporting director as well, or the entire hierarchy, because it is massive at the moment. It is maybe to say that although they did an awful lot, there still feels like there's a little bit to do with the squad. It doesn't feel perfect in certain areas. I mean, we've spoken about at the start of the season, it was absolutely fine to say, okay, they want to give Rio a pathway. So, you don't sign a left winger for that reason. But we've seen what that looks like in practice. And it's really managing Rio's minutes and then just looking kind of a little bit short on the wings, really. So, that's an area where you think they could have maybe done a little bit more. And of course, they did leave themselves short at centre half by going so late for Gay. And again, these things aren't in Arne Slot's control. And when I talk about mitigating factors, all these things need to be considered as a defence for why things aren't going perfectly.
It does, because even when we were discussing this with Lewis Steele, he was saying the club have been clear that for Rio and Gamoa, for instance, train Ione, they're only training with the first team for a couple of days a week because they don't want the bad set itch, Jadon Dans, the injury breakdown, so they're learning from that. So when you hear that, you're thinking, all right, it's all right to have a pathway, but if he's only training with the first team twice a week or so, what are the real expectations on minutes and the impact of what that pathway was look like? It does put a question mark, maybe against people above rather than just Arne Slot.
Yeah, because look, like I say, it's fine to say you want that pathway, but what it looks like in reality is just you're looking kind of an attacker short, really, because you can't put that much on Rio. And I think they're absolutely 100% right to be managing what he does in terms of training low, because we cannot go down that route again. I mean, how many of those youngsters ended up with those sorts of injuries and then we never really heard from them again? It was clearly a massive problem at Liverpool. So I'm glad that they've come up with some sort of solution to that. But of course, again, it puts the manager in a situation where he's kind of, okay, well, I've got this pathway for Rio, but God, I'm a bit short of an experienced attacker who can use more like in these situations. So, and of course, you throw on top of that the fact that, one of his other options is Chiesa, who he's just never fancied, rightly or wrongly. And I know he's a big fan favourite. And he's got a great song, and he scored some goals and had important moments this season. But the manager just doesn't want to use him. So if you go into a season knowing that, and you know that he probably can't use Rio too much, and that you know that Salah is going to AFCON, and you know that Isak is probably going to pick up an injury at some point, or at the very least, even if Isak hadn't picked up an injury, you know that Isak is going to turn up and be completely unfit for 4 months. So. Why not kind of, do more in that sense? Why not maybe push Chiesa to the door? Because, I mean, that's going to happen this summer, and he'll have barely picked up any minutes this season. So, why not just get ahead of that one? It's not like you're keeping around a player who the manager's reliant on and likes and will give lots of minutes to maybe mitigate the fact that Rio isn't quite ready yet. So, again, and I think those decisions need to be made above the head coach, really. So, again, it's giving him a squad where it's a little bit weaker than last season in certain areas, and asking him to go and do the same again. And I feel for Arne in that sense.
The one I struggle with in terms of the squad composition, I mean, we know he mentions PSG a lot, and he mentioned it in his last embargo just gone as well. But the style of players, we've talked about this, the way you call it, the data, the trend towards the physicality, the set piece nature, the direct nature of the Premier League. All our signings, it's fair to say, were more about getting on the ball, the opposite end of the scale maybe as well. Not saying tiki-taka, but more ballers than physical monsters that way. So when you think about how almost we've missed that trend, is that the data people and thinking they've got it wrong? Is that Richard Hughes' recruitment? But Arne Slot talks about how he's wanted those players. And even when we were targeting centre-halves, you think of the likes of Dean Huijsen, again, more of a player than a physical monster. So who kind of shares is it a shared responsibility again?
For me, that kind of judgment about where's the league going, what direction is it heading in, that for me is a massive part of the remit of the sporting director, because you give in that job sporting direction, and so you have to be attuned to which way the league is going in, which way football is going in, if there's going to be this leap towards set pieces being important and physicality being more important. You've got to get ahead of it in the way that Pep Guardiola did, in terms of he was the first really to move to the kind of whole 4 centre-backs thing, and or in this league certainly, and going physical in that way, and then having kind of his footballers ahead of that. It feels like you leap into the point where basically everybody needs to be physical in your team now, but Liverpool maybe didn't spot that. So again, not something I think was necessarily in Arne Slot's hand, albeit he is a part of recruitment decisions as well. And so, it's a bit strange to me that, he doesn't look at, say, he talks about the PSG game an awful lot from last season. But for me, as much as Liverpool, that was a kind of end-to-end game in the Anfield one, it was really entertaining, could have gone either way. Maybe Liverpool shaded it. But I think in the away leg where Liverpool got absolutely battered and somehow won, they were physically overpowered in that game.
Yeah.
Much, not necessarily through kind of direct long balls as they were in some other games, but it was very, very prominent to me and noticeable, the physical power that PSG had in comparison to Liverpool in those games. And then again, one of the other key games from the season is the 2-1 defeat to Newcastle in the League Cup final. Overpowered physically. And I think there were a few of those games dotted throughout the season where you thought the next step for this team clearly is to be more physically powerful. And he didn't do it. He went down a completely different route to not just some of those teams, but pretty much every team who have all swung towards physicality and set pieces and those sorts of things. So I thought that was an oversight at the time. I remember writing late last season, I think it was maybe April, I wrote a piece saying it was about Jules and Jules' success, and I wrote that that I felt that physical profiles, adding those in at the back and in midfield, was probably the next step for this team, and they didn't do that at all. So, I'm not just saying that with hindsight. I truly felt it at the time. So again, that's some, but I think Arne Slot it was part of that conversation. Should have been part of that conversation. Should have said, "Look, what happened to me in the Newcastle game? We need to be able to counter that." And that didn't happen. And so I think there's a little bit of a kind of collective blame maybe to be had around that one.
Yeah, it's probably fair to say that is Arne Slot getting the most out of those new signings? Probably not. It's taken a bit of time. Yes, they are starting to come good, but real question marks around those above him and how recruitment was made. This bit, I've got real concerns around this. So I'm labeling it under man management and honesty. I feel that almost in the defense of Arne Slot, he is sometimes directly compared to Jurgen Klopp, which is a bit unfair in this sense because, there's a uniqueness to Arne Slot and Jurgen Klopp. But, I mean, you look at the man on the screen, everyone remembers this interview when Jarell Quansah was asked about Arne Slot and kind of looked at the floor and avoided the question. We'll bring other names into the mix like Queven Kelleher, Harvey Elliott, Federico Chiesa now seeming a bit ostracised. We've heard the comments on Ibu Konate being at the scene of the crime. I mean, we don't even really need to start too much with the Mo Salah interview. Everyone knows what he said about his relationship with the head coach as well. Is there a question mark around then Arne Slot's man management style and concerns around that?
Well, what I would say is I think so there's a balance here. I'm kind of going to go for the prosecution and the defense on both. Kind of combined on this, and you can kind of see it from two different angles. I think you list players there. So Quansah, Kelleher, Elliott, Chiesa. Chiesa will be gone at the end of the season. The other three are no longer here. And is there any of those that you would look at and you kind of really truly mourn and feel like they had a big part to play at Liverpool going forward? And I would suggest not, to be honest. I think Elliott, you can see what's happened with him at Villa. They already don't want him. I think Chiesa's proven really the more starts he's get, the more you've kind of started to see how he's maybe just not of the level. And this is what the manager's seeing in training. Kelleher was used in much the same way as he was under Jurgen Klopp and wanted to make a move for the better of his career. And the Quansah one, he's doing well out in Germany, but I don't think anybody sat there kind of saying they're absolutely full of regrets that he went. But it really does. It kind of gets ignored massively. He was so keen to leave, you would not believe it. I mean, worth noting, not a boyhood Liverpool fan, by the way. I don't know whether he's taken that into being a little bit older and so doesn't necessarily have the emotional ties there. But you can sense it even at the back end of last season that he wanted to leave. Because he wanted to go out and play regular football. And I don't think if Jurgen was still here that he would have been the starting centre-back. I know he finished Jurgen's final season in the team, but I'm not sure he would have been there and stayed there for the entirety. So he was always going to want to leave. And it's just that's the build-up of his character, the makeup of his character, sorry. Like I say, I think because people think because he's a local lad, he's only from Warrington and he'd been at Liverpool for such a long time that he would only possibly have wanted to leave because he'd be forced out by a manager who doesn't like him. But he wanted to leave because he wanted to play football, and Liverpool could not offer him that, or couldn't offer him enough football that would have satisfied him. And I think the right move for everyone in that situation was for him to go where he's gone now. And so I don't necessarily hold that one against the manager in any sense. And like I say, the other ones, they're not elite level quality that he's just kind of ignoring. But so here's the flip side. But I would also say, I do think it's possible to get more out of your fringe players than he does.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Jurgen's biggest strength was. I mean, going away to Nottingham Forest in the league, starting Bobby Clark and Joe Gomez in midfield and somehow coming away with a win. I think I'm right in saying that happened. That was the Nunez one, wasn't it? That sometimes, it's okay to be like, I'm this ruthless manager. I will only accept a very, very elite level of quality. And he really does clearly have very, very high standards about who he wants to play and who he sees as his guys. But you kind of box yourself into a corner because injuries will happen. And then you've got to kind of call on some of those guys. And then Mo Salah might have a little bit of a drop in his performance level, and you've suddenly got to turn to someone else, and you're like, well, I actually don't want to use Chiesa, so maybe I'm going to tuck Wirtz out on the right-hand side, or you're going to have to do something a little bit crazy like that. And I think that was Jurgen's biggest strength. I mean, one of the reasons I think I was most disappointed with the Barnsley FA Cup game, and got a bit of stick really for suggesting that Liverpool weren't great in that game, but I really do stick by it in terms of the underlying numbers, the fact it was tight in scoreline until quite late in the game. And I think a lot of it is because I think I've seen far weaker cup teams under Jurgen Klopp go and get better results against that sort of level of opposition. You kind of Lallana and Chirivella in midfield and looking a lot more competent and able to create chances than Liverpool were in that game. And so that was a real strength of Jurgen, and maybe this is Arne's biggest problem, is that he's going to always be compared to the guy who came before him. But I think that was, Jurgen was squeezing everything he could out of fringe players and getting them to come in and put in performances you wouldn't believe. Like I say, Joe Gomez in midfield is crazy, and you win a Premier League game doing that. I can't imagine Arne being able to do that. It feels like the conditions have to be a certain level of perfect for him to be able to kind of go on successful runs and win games. So and they really haven't been perfect in this season. I think that's been one of his biggest problems. So I think that's a criticism you could level at him, is that he's not anywhere near as good at keeping his fringe players on board and getting the most out of them when he needs to call upon them.
It's almost strange that as much as that was Jurgen Klopp's skill, Arne Slot doesn't even always seem that bothered about keeping his fringe players on board. It's kind of like, these are my guys. I'm not really interested in anyone else a little bit as well. And I suppose it comes into his man management style. He is quite direct. He's quite honest. He will answer questions, as you know, quite honestly in press conferences, especially maybe, which I find refreshing. I want to give him this season. Tactical ones, he'll talk about them, won't he? Formation, styles, players, which Klopp sometimes got irritated by as well. But, I mean, this one as well, we'll steer away just from style of play for now, but he's been quite honest around his style and answering questions. Do we give him credit for that? Is he too honest? Where do we stand in that type of honesty nature and his man management as well?
Yeah, in terms of the man management, it's interesting. I wrote a piece at the end of last season, kind of looking back on what had changed and how Arne Slot kind of went about winning the Premier League, and spoke to a few people for that one, and kind of one of the things that was said to me, and it wasn't wrapped up either and kind of sugarcoated in any way. It was like, he is honest. He expects an elite environment where he can kind of criticize players and they can just take it on board and everybody learns, and that's the environment he's created now. Obviously, when you're winning, everybody thinks that's really good. Yeah. And, I wrote that in a positive sense in my piece. But, of course, there is a flip side to that, whereas sometimes players do need the arm around the shoulder. They need to be managed in the way that Jurgen managed them. And, again, being probably really unfair, using Jurgen as an example, one of the great man managers that we've seen ever in football, really, the ability to get players to run through a brick wall for him. And Arne's clearly not that level of charisma, because 99% of people in the world are not that level of charisma. So it's unfair to maybe judge him to that. But as I say, that kind of honesty and directness, it can be really, really useful sometimes, and other times it will rub people up the wrong way. I think one of the things that the players did like as well, and this was not just the players, actually, it was the wider staff at Kirby as well, when that change got made, that Jurgen towards the end particularly could be quite prickly and forceful, particularly with the staff, maybe not as avuncular with the people outside of the playing staff, and that rubbed people up the wrong way. And so Slot is much more calm, even though he can be direct and honest. He's much more calm maybe in the way that he delivers that and the way he accepts setbacks as well. So there's a difference that's definitely a positive in his favour. But yeah, that directness as well, like I say, it can rub people up the wrong way, and it's maybe not something people like. And we do see it in the press conferences, and it is interesting. And yeah, maybe sometimes too honest for his own good, because I'm never one who likes to, although obviously I'm a journalist, I sit in press conferences, we use the quotes of the newspapers, all these things. I'm not a big fan of kind of reading too much into what's said there, because it can get taken out of context. It can just be, you can just focus. I've seen a lot at the moment, ones who want to, they've completely decided that the manager needs to go, and therefore the season on everything he says and turning it into a negative. I mean, I find that stuff really kind of unedifying, to be honest. So I never like that. But he could probably do himself a favour by stop talking about the directness of the opposition. This isn't going to stop. This is the league. It's always kind of been this way. It was this way pretty much at the start of last season. I don't remember the lowest down teams, even at the start when Liverpool were blowing anyone away, just suddenly kind of saying, oh, we're going to play football against Liverpool, because they never really have it. As I agree, it's slightly more pronounced now than it ever was, but it's the job. It is the job of being Liverpool manager at this point, and there's no point talking about it, or certainly not as frequently as he is. I get that he needs to remind people from time to time that Liverpool probably facing more long balls than anybody else. It's so pronounced against them. But they're only doing it because it's a weakness. So you got to solve it, mate. It's not worth talking about. And consistently talking about the PSG game as well. The first leg of that was a disaster from a Liverpool perspective, even though they won it. So these are not the days that we all look back on as fantastic. That tie, it was a great footballing game at Anfield, but Liverpool lost it. And they also played horribly in the first leg and were very, very lucky to win that. So Liverpool fans will expect more than that being seen as the halcyon days of the club or the height of the football that's possible under Slot. It has to be better than that. So please do stop harking back to that game as a great day, because it really wasn't.
Yeah, probably the right way of phrasing it, just the way the communication, maybe could do himself a few more favours on this. And we were going to have to discuss this point, and this is one where critics of Arne Slot, I think they've actually got real truck with this, and there's some weight to this as well. The style of play is always going to come into the mix. Now, we're at Anfield for the games, and we talked about this. It's a passionate, it's a reactive crowd. People get up for things. I think, and I'm not really going to dress this up at any way, being at that stadium, there's been times the football has been weak, passive, boring, for want of a better phrase as well. I think you have to put those words into the mix. Not always, it's unfair to say, but at times this season.
Yeah, it hasn't been a fun watch. Liverpool kind of hanging on to the ball around the back, really slowing the game down, missing out on opportunities to play quickly when they could, albeit Slot talked about that recently and said that's not something he wants. He would rather than, if you can get there in one pass, then go and do it. And I think he talked about that actually in reference to when Wirtz scores against Fulham. Conor Bradley just drives forward, and it's obviously one pass that creates the chance. So, that was it's interesting. He clearly wants them to do more, to do better in terms of that. But we're not seeing it, and it is a little bit boring. It's not Jurgen Klopp style, but of course, it was never going to be Jurgen Klopp style as well, because albeit there was some similarities between him and Slot, I think he's kind of what he likes things, how the way he likes things to happen in possession is a little bit more sedate. And by the way, got a lot of praise for this last season. We have to remember that. The fact that Liverpool weren't just trying to fire it through the lines every time they won the ball, it made them a better team. I mean, I remember the back half of Jurgen Klopp's final season. They played a game against Villa. Does it end 3-3? Maybe. Is it 3-3? And there's a situation where Liverpool win the ball and McAllister just tries to fire one through the lines, and I think Liverpool are 1-0 up at the time. Liverpool win the ball in midfield. McAllister tries to fire one through straight away and just surrenders possession because the pass is never on. Villa 2 passes, Ollie Watkins is in and he scores, and that never happened last season under Slot, because he clearly told them just be a bit more sensible in those situations. And it did. It improved Liverpool from season to season to be in that way. But it does feel like the scales have tipped a little bit this season, and Liverpool, particularly off the back of the 9 defeats in 12, have become a little bit too passive. And I don't think the kind of press is particularly working well as well. One thing I would say that I think is important about aesthetics, and I've said this on many a pod, so I won't go into it in detail. I do think there's a debate about how easy it is to play good football in this league at the moment. I think it's very difficult with the style of the league at the moment. I don't think Arsenal are playing good football. I think City are playing good football in fits and starts, but not as consistently as they have previously. And then you go down the rest of the league and you're like, well, Chelsea aren't, United aren't, Tottenham certainly aren't. They're rubbish, and they're not playing any. So the aesthetics, I think you can almost take that out of the equation a little bit. As much as you're right to say it's an entertainment business, it's boring. But in terms of judging Arne Slot, I'm not sure it's something that will massively concern Liverpool, because I think the league as a whole is suffering from this problem of teams being unable to kind of play really, really nice football, because the opposition are much more aggressive in the way they defend now, and they don't allow for games to break out, because they're always trying to break it up, slow it down, taking 5 minutes over throw-ins. All these things are becoming issues for all the teams. So it's one of those things. I think it's not great to watch at the moment, but I also think it's not a massive factor, because I think that's everybody else's problem. And I think what Liverpool are more concerned about really is effectiveness. And for me, the bigger problem at the moment is that Liverpool are not great to watch, but they're not actually that effective either. And the underlying stuff under the hood does not look fantastic.
That's, again, as you phrased it, for the scales sliding one way. I get he had to stop the bleeding. I get there was a horrible run of results. And the first thing was like, let's get back to keeping clean sheets. I don't think anyone disagreed with that. That needed to happen. But now, and we've used this phrase a few times, you're seeing it consistently. You've seen it over a period. It's almost a coin flip, isn't it? It's, we'll try not to concede, and you're brilliant, Ekitike, you're brilliant, Vert. Just go and do something and see if you can nick us a goal, and we'll see how that lands us. And 50-50, like a coin flip, literally. There's positives there, as in you stop the bleeding, but there's not real long-term positives in this is really something to hang your hat on, is there?
No, this is it. You're right. I completely agree. He needed to do what he did in terms of solidifying Liverpool, because it was they were giving up chances left, right, and centre. It was so easy to play through, and he's absolutely achieved that. And he's put Liverpool in a far better position in the league than they were. You have a lot more confidence that they'll get top four than maybe you would have previously, and that's the minimum aim for the rest of the season. But you do probably need to see more, because as much as we're talking about the style and how it looks, one of the things that would make it slightly more exciting, even though it's probably not going to be as slick as you would hope, is if they created more chances. And someone says there that the lack of chances they create is wild. That's what I'm kind of alluding to when I said the stuff under the hood and the underlying stuff is not very good. Liverpool do not create enough. They really have sacrificed a lot of creativity to make themselves more solid. And that is fine in the short term. But in the long term, they have to do more than this. And like I say, the way they go about creating chances, maybe, like I say, City play attacking football in fits and starts. It's not perfect at the moment. But Liverpool need to be closer to them in terms of what they do and have real attacking patterns. And, like I say, I got a bit of stick for saying the Barnsley performance wasn't very good, but I genuinely believed it. Please, I promise everyone, not coming at this with some sort of agenda, or just kind of say how I saw it. And they get to 75 minutes against Barnsley, and I can't emphasize this enough, 0.75 expected goals created. With the quality Liverpool had on the pitch, and I know the front line wasn't perfect, but what they still had enough for me, for those attacking patterns to be there, and for the Barnsley keeper to at least need to produce a worldie, because it wasn't that like kind of ripped up FA Cup side that Klopp used to put out. It was a really decent side, and the reason I was less understanding of it, it's a cup game, they're not going to be as perfect in attack or whatever, is because this has been a pattern recently. This is not. And so I was kind of like, well, if this is the pattern against Premier League sides, maybe you see something a little bit better against the League One side. Maybe those attacking patterns he's working on, they start to come to the fore. And he just didn't. And again, so this is what I'm worried about, is that I just think the chance creation and the lack of slickness in attack is, they're just miles off kind of where they need to be in terms of going forward at the moment. And that's not talking about aesthetics or the boring football. It's like they just don't create enough chances to win football matches regularly. And that's why they end up in the Fulham game, for example, that being on a knife edge and then being able to nick a point late on, because Liverpool aren't creating enough to put the game out of sight. And they don't do that in a lot of games recently. So it's yeah, it's a real, that's a worry for me, because again, if this was happening at the start of the season, I'd say, look, all these new signings, give them a break, for goodness sake. It's going to take time. And so I was very, very kind of understanding at the start of the season. But the longer it goes on, and the longer the underlying numbers continue to be roughly kind of Europa League level when you look at them, the longer you're saying, well, this bank of evidence we've got that stretches possibly back to maybe kind of February of last year, it's a lot of evidence. It's a lot of underlying performance to say this is not a blip. This is not because of this mitigating factor, this mitigating factor. It's not just because of what the league looks like stylistically. All these things, it hasn't looked very good for a long time, really, what's going on under the hood. And I think that more than anything is what, is why that they haven't given him a new contract, and why they're kind of just keeping the powder dry and having a look at this. And it's why it is a debate, as much as some people really don't want it to be, is because what's going on in the underlying terms. It's not just the results, and you can go through dips, you can go through bad results, you can have problems in certain seasons. Klopp did, but everything that was underpinning it under Jurgen tended to look pretty good. And if not, there was a huge thing to blame, like losing all your centre halves, or losing several players to injury, or whatever the reasons were. It was very, very clear a lot of the time what was going wrong. Whereas in this situation, for the underlying numbers to have been bad for or not bad, but not great, or not good enough for nearly a year now, Liverpool's recruitment staff and their hierarchy there are going to have a real think about why that is. And that's what they are thinking about at the moment. And they're thinking about, is it because this is the limit of Slot's coaching? Is this because we just saw a little bit of kind of him using the leftovers of Jurgen up till the second half of last season, and then now this is the reality? And these are all the things you've got to consider. But it is that, for me, it's, Liverpool aren't exciting because they don't create enough chances, and they don't create enough chances because of the way they play, and that is a concern, I think.
And even now, because you talked about the start of the season, we give him time because you want to build it in and get patterns working. Is the other end of that what we're seeing now? You said, I think you're right, we've seen it for such a long time. This style of play is almost becoming natural to these players, habitual, isn't it? Like a bit passive, we say the coin flip style. It's not that you can just walk into the changing room and go, right, lads, we're going for it today. It's not going to happen, isn't it? And in this next 6 months for him is his biggest challenge, isn't it? Realistic. How does he change that style to be more attacking?
Yeah, because I think you need to show that the next season that follows this is going to be different. And, even you look at kind of Pochettino at Chelsea, for example, they have pretty disastrous at times, but then it really started to click towards the end, and it was starting to build. And you kind of thought, if he stuck with Poch after that, if he hadn't had a disagreement with the board and the way that they ran things, maybe they would have run that into the next season. I remember, Brendan Rodgers, when he gets Daniel Sturridge and he gets Coutinho in the middle of a season, and it kind of comes together for them in attack. And then they took that into then challenge from the title the following season. So your second half of your season is almost a run up to what's going to happen to the next one a lot of the time. And so I think he has to show more. I think he has to show that, like, he can get these attacking patterns going with all the quality of the players that he's got, that he can get Wirtz and Ekitike consistently doing what they did the other night, and that can happen from game to game. It can happen in the Premier League. And so, it just has to look a bit slicker for me. And I think it has to look a bit slicker for Liverpool. And also, the chance creation has to come up, and not at the expense of defending as well. You have to show a balanced team, I think. Otherwise, I think Liverpool, Richard Hughes, and that will get to the end of the season and kind of say, this has been a long time where this team has been not very balanced. And I just, and have a chat about why is that. I think a lot of it they will just look and say, the coach is not giving us a balanced team. He's got the teams he's got the tools to put together a more balanced side than what we're saying. That's the judgment they have to make. I feel like it should just be slightly better than it is, to be honest.
Yeah, it does feel such a key. Well, it is a key 6 months for Arne Slot for Liverpool. And for Arne Slot, I don't know if this is a defence or not, because it's right to say January, we've had all the reports, Conor Bradley's unfortunately out for the season, joining Leone and Isak in being long-term absentees. All the suggestions are there's going to be no one coming through the door. I mean, is that fair for then Slot to say, well, come on, I needed numbers with these injuries? Or is there an argument to say, well, you had 450 million in the summer, you've still got some brilliant players. Where were you standing on? Does January come into this judgment?
I think it will be mitigation if Canate and Gomez go down for a long period. Then I think you'll be able to say, look, because that's the reason we want to sign in is the possibility, the probability of Joe Gomez getting an injury. And then the fact that increases the possibility of Ibrahim Canate playing too much and getting an injury of his own. So that's the worry around those two. But I think if he gets to the end of the season and Canate's been fit, Joe Gomez has been able to pick up games and be an option there, then I don't really think that will come into it as a, oh, this is why we didn't look any good as a side between, the end of the season, because I just don't think that's a relevant excuse, really. I think, like I say, if even if you do get injuries at centre half, is this attack going to look a little bit better between now and the end of the season? I think that's something they'll 100% be tracking. And I'd say if they can avoid injuries, and Canate was fully fit for the majority of last season, bar being fallen on, can you get him through to the end of the season? If you can, then I don't think it will be a huge factor, really, or it shouldn't be seen as something that's completely undermined the ability to make the team balanced.
Yeah, true. There is honesty in that. And I suppose for the future element, because this is sort of fast forwarding a little bit into 6 months in the summer, but even now, people are talking about, and there's a clamour from some element about an interim, something like that. But realistically, it's fair to say, unless things completely fall off a cliff again and we go 5-15 and Champions League comes under threat, any romantic natures of Steven Gerrard coming in the dugout with Johnny Heitinger as assistant coach or anything, they're just not on the table for FSG, are
they? I think with an interim, I think an interim's on the table if it gets really, really bad. I think it's they clearly didn't want to do it around the time it was 9 defeats in 12, and they made the call that a Slot would be better than any interim. But I wouldn't rule that out at all. I think if it gets really, really bad again, and they think, well, we've just got to do something to stop this being as bad as it is. If he suffers 9 defeats in 12 over the next 12 games, they'll go for an interim. So, and who would be in the mix? Maybe it would be Stevie just to see them through. Maybe, whoever else it would be. I'm not sure it would be particularly successful, but you can't lose that many games as Liverpool manager. You can't just keep losing and losing and losing as he was. You can't do that twice in the season, that's for sure. So I think they would prefer to avoid it completely. And maybe Slot will be able to get them through without that happening. I would certainly hope so. But, they're not. I don't think they'd be completely against an interim. I think that was the route that they would have had to go down early in the season if maybe Slot had lost to West Ham. Yeah,
be interested. In a way, as bad as it is, you hope we don't have that one of results. This conversation doesn't come up for everyone's on that scenario. For the future, though, with the news in the football world, I mean, I can make an argument. This is bad news for Arne Slot's future. That we know Javi Alonzo is now a free agent, having left Real Madrid. We know in the summer that the World Cup will pass, and people will throw out names like Nagelsmann. Once the World Cup's in Germany could be free. Luis Enrique, question marks. But even just the fact that always in the summer, the market's better for players and managers or head coaches at the same time. But especially this Javi Alonso spectre, that's just looming over Arne Slot. And you do wonder how that's in the minds of the powers that be.
Yeah, it just causes him a problem in the sense that, the reason, like I say, that he doesn't get sacked in the middle of the season is because the option that's the alternative is not as good as him. Whereas when he gets to summer, if the football is broadly similar, the underlying performance is broadly similar, Liverpool will look at that and say, well, this has been the case for a long time. Do we think this manager who we liked a lot, we've got really good connections with, we know his representatives, and we know he would quite like to come to Liverpool as well. He ended up at Real Madrid in the end, of course, in that situation because he wasn't ready to leave Bayer Leverkusen at the time that Liverpool needed a manager. And then the timing was perfect to go to Real Madrid. Probably a silly step on his behalf, not realizing how crazy it is over there. But, it wasn't the kind of doesn't want to come to Liverpool. And in fact, as he looks to kind of, he doesn't have to rebuild his reputation now because everybody knows what happened to him there. But I mean, when he's picking his next move, In terms of sensible clubs that will give you time and will give you the tools to do your job, Liverpool has got to be right up there. And of course, he has that personal affection for them as well. So it ticks an awful lot of boxes. So, and we know Liverpool liked him. So again, they're going to get to the summer and they'll have a call. We either renew Arne Slot's contract or we go down a different route. And Alonso's one of those potential routes. And of course, you know, they did rate him very highly. I don't think it's accurate to say it was first choice, second choice. He never got that far with Alonso. He couldn't, because he wanted to stay. He wanted to do another year in Germany. And I think the right move for him was to do that and get a bit more experience. But, you know, he was certainly high in the thinking and they liked him a lot. So, you know, at one point he was someone that they hoped to have the chance to be able to appoint. So, or be able to at least talk to a bit more. So, yeah, it's not maybe helpful to Arne, and it increases the kind of speed with which he needs to turn things around and show a little bit more, I think, between now and the end of the season.
And I suppose a final one for this, because we spelled it out in terms of style of play, the man management elements. Will it come down to obviously the people that make decisions like Michael Edwards, Richard Hughes? You've obviously got to get in the Champions League. You've got to improve the style of play. But if we don't see those, that's probably not necessarily going to be enough to save you.
Yeah, my view is, and this is just my personal view, but I think if the underlying numbers stay the same and Liverpool do get in the top four, I'm not massively convinced that will be enough to keep him in the job, because I just think they are so wedded to, well, what's the likelihood that this level of performance gets us to win the biggest trophies? And it's basically zero. So I think it's a massive factor. And again, it's one of the reasons I'm kind of quite down on Liverpool at the moment. I think people think you're being harsh because they'll win games and you're still like, oh, you know, like the cup game. You know, I didn't feel great about the performance because I looked at some of the aspects of it and it was just like, does this give us a repeatable route to these sorts of wins in scoreline terms? And the fact is no. So, you know, that's all part of the consideration for them really, is that, and that's why I think kind of top four alone might not just be enough, because even though it's massive for Liverpool to get there, I still just think they'll look at the wider picture and what is available as an alternative and what they could maybe do, and just think, you know what, thanks very much, but it was a long period of time there where the underlying performance wasn't quite right. And so we're making the call to go in a different direction. That just wouldn't surprise me at all. But of course, it wouldn't hurt Arne either in terms of his chances to get there and to be there in the top four come May. So definitely a name for him, but I do think he needs a little bit more out of the football. And that's not just the aesthetics, like I say. I just think he needs a few more games where it's 2 expected goals for Liverpool, half an expected goal for the opposition. More games where Liverpool look really balanced and competent. And that doesn't have to be every game, because they're a top four side. You can lose a few games. You're not going to be getting points at kind of the rate that a team that wins the league does. That's absolutely fine. But you'd almost like them to kind of be a little bit more kind of swinging from really, really competent to occasionally not great than this, which is just this kind of very level, you know, 5th, 6th place finish kind of football that they're playing at the moment, where it is those coin flip games really. So, I top four will help, but I don't think it'll just be enough on its own.
I suppose a final one that's a fair question, and if you have alluded to this at times in a chat, because of the style we're playing, and I didn't mind this comment actually, you feel more confident sometimes in the San Siro away or Arsenal away with the style of performance than getting a result there. Does a Champions League win make a renewal straight automatic?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. Christ, I mean, yeah, Jesus. How many, you know, the amount of Liverpool managers that won a European Cup ever. And I mean, what that would mean, and surely Liverpool, they can't just, I don't think they'll, you know, kind of look their way to winning that. You have to show real quality at times. So you have to assume if Liverpool go and win the Champions League that the performance level has gone up massively, and they are having games where the underlying stuff looks really good. I can't imagine a world where they just purely spawn their way there. And even if they do spawn their way there, the argument's not like, oh, this is like a Di Matteo situation, because this manager won the league. So if he backs it up by winning the Champions League, I dare say it'll suggest that he's absolutely magic. So there's no question whatsoever he gets a new deal if he does that. But I just don't think the football they are playing, it could, it can get them decent points or the odd win in the big away games. But I just think when they come up against, if they face PSG again, if they face Manchester City, I just think what they could do to them in terms of the quality of their play versus Liverpool's at the moment. I don't think Liverpool will be near that, to be honest.
Doesn't feel that way at all, but we shall see what unfolds. We'll see what unfolds in January. It's expected to be a quiet window. We'll see about the style of play. We'll see if any other blow-ups happen. It's so much to work out between now and the end of the season, and that spectre of Javi Alonso is just going to loom large all the way through. All it leaves me to say, as ever, is for the time, insight, and for answering all the questions, David, it is massively appreciated.
Thank you. And I thought we got some great comments there as well. I thought it was like a really good kind of people recognizing that it's a debate to be had. It doesn't have to be like nasty or, it was, it was nice to read some of the input there.
Indeed. Absolutely. And ladies and gents, on the 14th of January, that was an AI special for Anfield Index.